All right, welcome everybody back to Coach's Corner. I'm Coach Dave McDonough. We appreciate everybody showing us some love out there and following us and subscribing. I'm Coach Dave. Welcome back to Coach's Corner. Come on. Today's show, we have some boxing history here. And a lot of people out there today are not aware of a lot of the people who have helped shape boxing to what it is today. And they may be forgotten or the old era of boxing. But, you know, it's where it began. And I feel we owe it to fans to know what a lot of these guys went through back in the day. So we're going to talk about a fighter named Tough Tony Pellone, who had 76 pro fights, 51-13. Am I correct on that number? And 7 draws?
Something like that.
That's on BoxRec, right?
Right. Yeah.
So we have Tony's dad, Neil Pellone, with us today. Welcome, Neil. Appreciate you guys making the trip.
Thank you, Dave.
We have boxing historian here, Jose Corpus.
Glad to be here.
Thank you very much. 2 books.
2, and the third one coming out in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Write for Box News.
I've written for Boxing News, The Sweet Science, a couple other websites, Premier Boxing Champions.
Awesome. We welcome you. And then we also have Tony Pellone's nephew, Neil Pellone, here.
Yes, thanks for having us, Dave.
Guys, thank you for making the trip. I really appreciate it. When I started looking at some of your posts and some of the stories and started doing a little research, it's a very unique story about your dad in an era of boxing that, you know, a lot of people really don't know about. You know, we're in the era of, you said it 5 minutes ago, TikTok, you know, those old days of boxing when, you know, boxing was you fought 2 or 3 times a week. The Garden was popping. New York was a mecca for boxing at the time. People went to boxing events. They dressed up. They wore suits and ties. It was a big event where, you know, and today it's more of a show than the event.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's changed. I remember my first day in the first grade when they told the kids, raise your hand and say your name. The teacher says, oh, are you related to Tony Pellone? But as time went by, less and less people knew. So some people say, well, how famous was your father? I say, well, back in the day, if everybody knew a second baseman for the Cubs, you know, he was about that popular.
Yeah.
And then as years went by, it's less and less and less. And
Right.
Thanks to people like Jose Corpus who are so deeply into boxing. I mean,
Right.
he knows about your relatives. He knows about my relatives. It's like a resurgence, a rebirth, and of course we went through with an attempt to have my father in the New York State Hall of Fame, and
Right.
the whole thing materialized, and we did it, and
then here
why
you
we're
are
here.
now.
Here we are now.
Let's talk about, you know, the era, because I think people can't, you know, you go back, and I find it with my kids, right? You try to tell them what it was really like, or, you know, there are pictures, and they really can't fathom. Tell us about the era of boxing that your dad was growing up in, because, you know, you were a young man growing up in it. A lot of great fighters at that time. LaMotta, Gennaro, Robinson coming up, others that I don't even want to start missing out of disrespect. But what was that era like, and what was it like for you as your dad being a fighter then?
Well, my father started at 15 years old, and when he retired, I was only 1 or 2 years old. So I missed his boxing career. But I do recall like the sense of celebrity that he had.
Right.
You know, people would say, "Hey, Tony," you know, as he went down the block. But here's I mean, if you're talking about the era itself, though, like I recall as a teenager, the Beatles made it, and every kid in Brooklyn wanted to buy a guitar and become a rock star. In my father's era, everybody wanted to be a boxer.
Yeah.
That was it. That was your way out of, say, quote, the ghetto, or out of.
Yeah.
But it got you a certain sense of style, a certain sense of accomplishment,
Yeah.
and money too. You know, with the.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, prize, and then we call it prize fighting, right? You don't hear that term too much anymore, right, Jose? Well, boxing. Prize fighting was, look, you fight for the prize. What's the prize? Money's the prize.
You know,
Okay.
the way I met Tony was I used to train at a gym in Coney Island, and I used to run on the boardwalk. And there was this older guy. He would throw punches at us when we ran. So one day I just decided to talk to him because I recognized that face as being an ex-fighter's face. And I asked him if he boxed, and he made a distinction. He says, no, I wasn't a boxer. I was a prize fighter. And he said his very first fight he had, they gave him a watch. The second fight he had, they gave him a watch again. He said, I don't need this watch. So he sold it back to the promoter for $15. Third fight, a watch. Fourth fight, a watch. He kept selling it back. So he told me I fought 125 times for the same watch.
Yeah.
But he made a distinction between prize fighting and boxing, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that term you're not hearing anymore.
No, you don't know what it is, prize fighter, yeah.
The old-timers will tell you that terminology. So, talking about Tony a little bit here, coming out, a lot of moving parts in the boxing world at that time, right? A lot of fighters, New York City, a lot of stuff, a lot of action happening. I don't think people realize what it takes to move fighters and who you have with you, who you have as management, who you have training. But 76 pro fights on BoxRec. And I know you say there's more, but
There's a couple more.
There's a couple more. Hell of an accomplishment for any fighter at any point. And the names that he fought, I've seen some of the names, Gennaro, Giovanelli, Graham, the list goes on and on and on.
Ike Williams, Kid Gavilan.
Yeah, Kid Gavilan. Yeah. I mean, you saw it on the back end. What is the preparation for him at that point, for that level? What do you think is how is he preparing himself to, or is it, look, I need to feed my family and this is what I do?
It's a little bit of both. I think it was partly in his DNA also.
I think he had a sense of accomplishment. He was even proud of his handwriting.
Yeah.
He was probably what today they call OCD. He was a perfectionist, and probably it was a sense of accomplishment. Preparation. They used to train up at Greenwood Lake.
Yeah.
And according to his manager's son, he says basically they went to Greenwood Lake because his manager wanted to get them out of the city, away from temptation, away from the nightlife, and the manager's wife would prepare certain foods for them, and it kept them focused.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my father enjoyed being focused.
Yeah, I think,
like I say, even he'd criticize my handwriting because he had a really beautiful handwriting when he spelled his name or whatever.
Yeah, that's a dying breed too today. You know what I mean?
They don't teach script
I know.
anymore.
It's not
They'll
me.
teach script. I had a kid ask me, because I write in script, right? He goes, what's that?
Yeah.
I go, what do you mean, what's that?
Yeah.
But getting to your point about going away, fighters, getting away in camp, and even now, you have to take the fighter away, I think, or you have to take him out of his environment where he's a little bit comfortable and around the people, because it takes him to focus on his preparation to fight. But at that point, he's fighting so much. I mean, I saw he fought 5 times in a month, 6 times in a month.
Well, not in a month, but there was years he fought 10 to 11 fights in a year.
Yeah.
So he was fighting every 3 weeks.
Right.
And one of the great distinctions he holds is he beat Charlie Faseri. What was Charlie's record?
Like 46-0.
46-0, and then he beat Billy Graham. Billy Graham didn't lose in 56 fights.
Right.
He's the only fighter to ever beat 2 fighters with records of 40-0. To not lose, be undefeated in 40 fights. And as we've gone through this journey, I've been, I run the page, the Instagram page, and every day you put a post and you're reading different articles, and it was amazing. Like he fought Patsy Giovanelli twice in a month.
Yeah.
You know, in 2 weeks later. So talk about preparation. Like, do you really have time to heal? And they fought. They were on top of each other's bodies.
And you're fighting 15 rounds in those days.
Correct.
You know, and look, the equipment is not the equipment today.
not
You
at all.
know, the gloves are not the gloves today. The hand wraps and everything what we know today is different. But you're right. To fight 2 weeks, you know, at that level.
At that level, and also, like, you know, Jose had written an article, and he had the most headline fights in the Garden at one time. He had 17 headline fights. And he swears he had the most headline fights in St. Nicholas Arena as well.
At one time he did, yeah.
And he had fought Giovanelli, like I said, back in St. Nicholas. And 2 weeks later, he's fighting in the Garden.
Yeah.
And even the undercards were pretty impressive. You had Jake LaMotta on the card, Sugar Ray Robinson.
Charlie Burley,
Yeah.
Holman Williams, a lot of guys, yeah.
But you know, at that time, look, it's the boroughs against the boroughs. Everybody, gyms were prevalent more.
And it wasn't
Everything
at
good
that
at the
time.
gym.
And it wasn't just the boroughs versus the boroughs. It was the Italians against the Jewish fighter,
Yeah.
you know, the Irish fighter.
You had
Yeah.
authenticity coming into effect there too. But like you said, Jose, everybody had gyms. There were gyms everywhere. You know, so you know to come out into the Garden to see your local or favorite fighter up close. You know, we didn't have TV at that time. There was no. You had radio.
Yeah.
So the fights were on radio. You didn't have. You know, you could sit home and watch it on pay-per-view or cable or stream it like we have today. So, you know, you got out and you supported boxing. With all this, the amount of people he's fighting and the names that he's fighting, title shots, anything, because with that kind of record and the talent he's fighting at the time, we could talk about, you know, boxing history. Where does that fall into play?
Well, remember, this was World War II, and the titles were frozen for most of
Yeah.
that time. So there was no title fights. Joe Louis wasn't fighting. Tony Zale wasn't fighting. So he kind of caught the tail end of that. And then afterwards, Ray Robinson became champ. Ray Robinson had a couple of disputes with Madison Square Garden. So Pellone came around basically at the wrong time. He was number one contender more than, at least 2 times he was number one contender.
Yeah.
So he would have gotten a title shot had the titles not been frozen and had Robinson not been going back and forth with Madison Square Garden.
And an interesting thing, he beat, when he was 17, he fought Bob Montgomery.
Okay.
Bob Montgomery was the lightweight champion of the world. And he beat Bob Montgomery when he was the lightweight champ. Unfortunately,
They were both 137 pounds or
They were too
something,
much,
right?
yeah.
Otherwise, it would have
Yeah.
been on the title would have been on the line.
Yeah. Where would you have had, you know, hindsight being 2020, skill level, style wise? How do you put Tony up there? What was his style and not so much his skill level. Skill level was obviously a high skill level. Where would you rate him against a guy like Robinson?
Well, I mean, I asked him before. He didn't ever think he would ever beat Robinson, right? But he thought he was on level with everyone else.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure he was working with these guys, sparring at some point.
Yep.
And, you know, challenging himself.
Well, they called him the gatekeeper or the policeman, right?
Right.
You had to beat him to get to Robinson,
Yeah.
right? So Charlie Fasari had to get past Pellone to get the title shot. Kid Gavilan had to get past Pellone to get the title shot.
Yeah.
Chuck Taylor had to beat Pellone to get past the title shot.
Yeah, they had to show something.
Robinson himself told Pellone, if they could beat you, I know I have a real fight on my hand. And you're talking about a 19-year-old kid that is playing policeman for the welterweight division.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, Dave, you talk about style. As I've been reading articles and, you know, breaking down his career, they say he had a very awkward style. He was a very crowding guy.
Yeah.
They almost say he had no style. He was a brawler. He was on top of you.
I mean, from what I've read and looked at, and it's hard, like, yeah, you see pictures of him pressing people and being in close with them, that he wasn't on the outside. He wasn't, you know, a pure boxer, maybe you want to call it.
He was shorter than everybody
yeah.
also, though. And he had a shorter reach, so he had to get inside.
Yeah.
He's only like 5'5", 5'6".
Yeah.
Something like
Right,
that.
yeah.
And, you know, styles make fights. Like, Chuck Taylor and him had 3 really
Yeah.
battles. They had 3 brawls, and they didn't really like each other. As you read the articles, they weren't big fans of each other. Chuck won 2 of them, I think. But I also think Chuck's style just was somehow negated Tony's style, right? Because if you look at Chuck's overall record, it's not that great compared to what my uncle had.
Right.
So I think that style in itself, but then his style, like going back, he fought Johnny Greco. Johnny Greco, when he beat Johnny Greco, was the Canadian welterweight champion at the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, his career at 21, he's done.
Yeah,
I mean, that's amazing, the amount of fights that fast.
I know.
Is he done because of personally or achieving what he wanted to achieve, or was it
He said his legs were gone.
right?
He didn't have the agility anymore. And Jose could probably help me with this. Growing up, I remember hearing a lot about my father fighting Kid Gavilan on 4 days' notice. Somebody else got sick,
You're
backed
right,
out
yes.
of the fight.
Tony Gennaro.
Is it Tony Gennaro backed out?
subbed in
My
for
father
Gennaro.
fought him and lost a split decision.
It was close. Yeah.
And you know, a lot of the fans in the garden, you know, booed the decision and whatever. But that was when you get back to think about being a champion. That's probably the closest he came to being a champion, where he fought this, you know,
Yeah,
monolithic guy.
And then Kid Gavilan went on to fight Sugar Ray, right?
Yeah.
yeah, he did. And you know, you go back to the same thing, fighting on 2 weeks' notice. At that level, you're not fighting a club show on 2 weeks' notice.
No.
You're fighting, you know, guys out there, high skilled, fighting for champions, former, you know, champions, or you know, fighting ex-champions. I think people today don't realize that. Like, look, you look at Chavez, has 70-plus fights, Julio Chavez, right? Great amount of fights. Look at Canelo, the amount of fights that he has. You know, I think it's kind of mind-boggling today because you would probably know more that people are coddling their fighters. They're not. The fight game is like, okay, we're going to fight you maybe 20 times, 25 times. We have a number. We have a goal of everything else. And the other mind-boggling fact is this, right? And I say this all the time, if you win 20 games as a baseball player, the teams are going to open up the books for you. They're going to give you whatever you need, right? Write you a check. 20 games as a fighter, you got fighters out there not making a living,
Sure.
not world champions, or not being paid properly. Tough sport. Tough sport. But let's kind of roll back to the era because there's more to this uniqueness of the story. I think that boxing in New York, there was a lot of involvement with different management and everything. Let's talk about your dad's manager and how that came about.
Well, it's funny that I'm learning more about him as time goes by because I've been talking to his relatives, and his son actually recently wrote a book about my father's manager, and who also managed Rocky Castellani, and there are references to their careers, my father's career training and stuff, but apparently. In my mind, growing up, I always thought that Tommy Ryan was very well associated with the Genovese family. But in my mind, he only became a, quote, big shot after he stopped managing fighters, meaning my father and Rocky Castellani.
Right.
Apparently, I was very wrong, that he actually, at the age of 16, went to work for Lucky Luciano in the 1930s or 20s. So he was forever involved in it. But also, he was an aspiring boxer himself. His name was Thomas Eberly, and he took the name Tommy Ryan, who was his Irish hero as a boxer, because most Italians changed their name in those days anyway to do anything professionally. And he fought 9 times and won 9 times. And his father didn't want him to be a boxer. And he told his father, he said, all right, Dad, all right. If I lose one, I'll quit. And he lost the next fight and quit.
Yeah.
Then went and became a manager, a trainer, and all that stuff. And a seasoned member of the Genovese family. But the thing is, there was a cabal in those days. There was Frankie Carbo,
Yes.
All right, so they
You
were
had Frankie Carbo, you had Blinky Palermo, you had a lot of different characters running around in New York in the boxing world.
Basically controlling the game. Yeah.
Yeah, we're controlling the game, and I think the effect on that, okay, look, the name Tommy Ryan, big name, right, had to help your dad's career as far as him being under him to have this many fights and to be there.
I guess he made a lot of matches for him.
Yeah.
You know, kept him going.
Yeah.
For better or worse, you say 5 times a month fighting or whatever. You know, I mean, he took a beating. You know, win or lose, you take a beating.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, a quarterback. You know, concussions, whatever. You know.
Yeah, I mean, we see today, and fighters a lot different than that. How would you, and I'm going to ask Jose this, how would you put that time to where we are today as a historian?
Well, this
Give me
was,
your take on this.
These were guys that grew up during the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Right? And my grandparents were like that too. 50 years after the Great Depression, they were still saving every penny because you never knew what would happen the next day. So I think they treated boxing more as a job, and they didn't worry about the fame as much as we see now with some guys. You know, now they want to be movie stars. Boxing, when TV came out, it was one of the most popular programs on TV. So you kind of became a TV star. But those guys were just doing their jobs. They were like a lunch and pail kind of guys.
Yeah.
That's all it was to them. Yep.
Yeah, blue collar.
Blue collar, exactly.
Get your lunchbox, go to work, come back home,
Yep.
and everything else.
What I heard from about that era is that the mafia, or whatever you want to call them, didn't make fighters. They went after who was good already. And if you were good, then they will keep putting you on, right? So it's not like somebody was created, right? They didn't build up fighters the way they do now.
The way they do. They were
Correct.
looking for guys that were already established that
And
they could.
and they can market and make them popular.
Marketable, that's the great
Exactly,
thing. And
yeah.
that's what my uncle was. My uncle was marketable for the Garden. He was
Yeah.
a local kid fighting a lot of, I'm sure there was 60% Italian people
Yeah.
at the Garden watching the fights. So he was a marketable
And
name.
he was good
And he was good.
and willing to fight anyone.
Yeah.
That was what they wanted. back
Who
then.
was the Irish boxer from the East Side? I think his name was Young. Was it Jimmy
Patty
Young?
Young.
Patty Young. So when my father would fight Patty Young, they both lived in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah.
Village, West Village, the Italians.
Yeah.
You go over more towards the west, and you had the Westies.
West Side.
So Patty Young would represent the Irish in the Garden, and
they were
how could
probably
you stop selling the place out? That's
There
how
were
it's
probably good fights in the stands too going on.
Yeah,
there.
really.
and
You know?
a similar thing to that was Ruby Kessler.
Yeah, and Maxie Shapiro too.
Yeah, and Maxie
Those days,
Shapiro. When they fought, it was very led up, a lot of hype leading up to the fight.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing when you mentioned Tommy Ryan was Vincent Gigante, the Chin,
Yeah.
fought. They grew up in the same building, right, on Thompson Street.
Same block at least.
Same
right?
block.
Same block, yeah.
They grew up on the same
But
block.
they were,
okay.
they played touch football in the
Yeah,
street
yeah,
together.
yeah.
They were kids,
And a lot of people don't realize the Chin was actually a fighter, and he was a decent fighter.
He had
was-
20 pro fights, I think.
I
Didn't
think
he?
like 26,
16, something like
26,
that.
Something like that, yeah.
And I see you got some great pictures here, which I want to kind of show. And I know it's a little cut off. This is at your dad's wedding. Vincent Gigante, your dad, Rocky Castellani. Great picture here. Some nostalgia that you brought in here. One with Abbott and Costello, Tommy Ryan. Great picture here.
Yeah.
This is the thing with boxing today, and this is actually one of my favorites that you guys brought in here for people to see. The old Madison Square Garden, and I mean you can see it's a little cut on the barn. Monday boxing.
Every night of the week.
Yeah, every night of the week, and today we're seeing this get away from us.
Yeah.
Now you wrote 2 books on this already. You're involved, and you guys are, have petitioned to get your dad and your uncle and have, in the Hall of Fame and everything else. Why do we see this part of boxing going away from us for a sport that's been with us so long? I mean, it dates back. You know what I'm saying? Why do we see, in other sports, past athletes are honored. You know, football, baseball, basketball, there's always, you know, but boxing seems to get lost in the transition somewhere. Why do you think?
I don't know. I think that's the $1 million question. I don't know. I think there's a lot of factors going on. I think other sports have gotten more popular. There's more TV programming on. I think that's part of it, so the competition is greater. I also think there's less fights, and boxing's taken a couple of black eyes over the years. You had the Kafiva hearings, then you had the Ring Magazine scandal in the 70s. Every once in a while you get a Muhammad Ali or an Oscar De La Hoya or Mike Tyson, and it comes back. So there's a yearning for it. But I don't think these fighters are getting together enough to have these great fights. The last I think we saw of it was the 80s when Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, Hagler, they were fighting everyone, no questions asked, fighting within a few months. Now everyone wants to I never ever heard the word marinate. I heard that for cooking, not for boxing. Now they want to let fights marinate. Whatever. So the game has changed in a lot of different ways.
It's a great way of looking at it. They're marinating it to make more money. So
Yeah.
the fighting game has turned into like what's going to sell the most, as opposed to what's the most. I'll fight anybody, and it was entertainment, like
Yeah.
you said. And also having the 4 belts or 5 belts that you have. Do we really know who, like the lightweight champion of the world right now? Does anybody know all 4 of them? If you ask people,
No.
No.
And then look, I read, you guys are involved, you obviously, Jose too. I mean, there's organizations across the board, man. You have money, you could start a boxing organization tomorrow, you know what I mean? And, you know, put up a belt and everything else. I think it's just oversaturated, okay? And honestly, there is talent out there right now
Yes.
that needs to be shown off and needs to fight. And marinate what? Money's there. The best fights are going to sell. Pay-per-views are you know, ginormous. I mean, look at Canelo Belanga. That pay-per-view was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have a Mexican fighter fighting a Puerto Rican fighter. You know, going back to, nobody wants to use the word ethnicity fighting, and that's what it is.
Sure.
Okay? You know, Irish, Italian, whatever. You know, people want to see that. You know, the fans. But I also think that you touched on fighters like, you know, an Ali or a De La Hoya. It's too hard for these guys to be like that today. Like, you know, you'll see, I think Canelo might be your last
Interesting.
guy because of where he started from 15. And I'm not saying he's on a Muhammad Ali level, okay? But starting at 15 to where he is, he fights constantly. People say he cherry picks, but he fights everybody that they're going to put in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
He's got 70-plus fights, okay? Ryan Garcia was a media fighter,
Right.
okay? A lot of these other guys are, you know, they're not being built with maybe where an Ali or a De La Hoya was.
you know, part of the problem I believe too. Like we'll go to the Ring 8 magazine,
Yeah.
you know, Ring 8 dinners, and they'll introduce a guy. This is Joe X, and he's a boxing. He's an influencer boxer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're more interested in building their web page and instead of actually doing the work and putting in the time of.
I'll touch on that, okay? I was in a camp, and I don't want to say where, with who, when, and where. And there was a kid who was an influencer there, okay? His first influencer fight, he was getting paid $60,000. His first, I mean, I got fighters. I have a kid who was 13-1, didn't make $60,000 if you put it all together.
Got it. Yeah.
You know, but But let's get back to Tony for a little bit, and I'd really like to hear a little bit more. And I know he was done by the time you really kind of grew up.
Yeah.
You had no ambition to go box? Or
He
was,
did.
did,
He
he, did he
did.
keep you away from it?
Yeah, you know, he pretty much told me that if I was became a boxer, he'd break my head.
Yeah.
That was, and that's funny. He didn't get that often involved in boxing, but you know, occasionally he did a little something. And like I remember once he refereed a boxing match, an outdoor thing in the middle of the summer, and you know, and it was nice to see him involved. You know, like And now, ladies and gentlemen, a great fighter from the past, Tony Pellone, and that's my dad up there, whatever. But
go ahead.
I remember this one particular fight. The kid comes out, bang, bang, boom. It's like the fight lasted like 3 seconds. And everybody in the neighborhood was like, oh, my God, this kid's like next day, what did we find out? The guy's father didn't want him to fight.
Yeah.
So what was the point I was making? But,
yeah. But, with all your dad's experience, he didn't train people afterwards. I mean, you'd think at that level, to be that kind of experience and knowledge and going through the sport.
When I first went to look for him was because I was trying to be a boxer, and I was told he had a gym. And I happened to meet him about 5 years after he closed the gym. But I remember one of the first things he asked me was, he said, everyone wants to be a fighter, but are you ready to be an ex-fighter? Right? And then I let that sink in for a little while, right? So I think your father was a little conflicted because I believe that he thought there were better ways to make a living.
Correct.
So I don't think he wanted to really push anyone, but I think he also understood that boxing was a good way to teach discipline and keep kids off the street. So I think that was the extent of what he wanted to do as a trainer. To give the kids yeah, exactly.
Well, definitely the discipline is there because, look, we all know. You guys grew up in the game. You've all been around it. It's not easy, whether you're training just to training as an amateur, training as a pro, getting in the ring. Like I tell these young kids, I said, look, you're not doing something that everybody can do. We all grew up in the times, you played baseball, whether you were good or not. You went to the schoolyard, you played with your friends, you played football. Not everybody played for the high school or the college team, but everybody played in the neighborhood. You didn't play boxing in the neighborhood. Like you didn't wake up and say, "Hey, Jose, we're going down to the playground. Get your gloves. We're going to box today."
Right.
So I think you're right. That discipline, that accomplishment of to get a kid in the ring, first of all, off his phone, off his TV, whatever he's doing out there, computer, right?
Yeah.
And do 45 minutes to an hour of a boxing workout.
What's interesting, Dave? Going a little bit backwards. He started at 15. Like he switched names with my uncle, who was his older brother. So if you think about it, he was at the Garden, headlining the Garden at 17. So he already had
second youngest ever headline at Madison Square
So he
Garden.
already had like 40 fights. 15's a child still, right? Fighting 28-year-old men.
Yeah, but
Probably wasn't even shaving
This is the
yet.
thing, like, okay, and I'll go back to Canelo. Canelo started at 15. Look where he is today. Your dad, your uncle, his career is over at 21. Correct. 76 fights on BoxRec.
Yeah, 9 years.
Not counting whatever else that you guys say that's out there. We know. 76 fights in what?
9 years, right?
And
8 years.
I think that's why Jose's, when you said he was conflicted, right? He was beat up. In 9 years, he was beat up, right? I don't think he wanted to. It wasn't worth the money for certain people to get somebody else. But through this journey, though, he had that gym, the Ave Maria Club, which it was more about taking the kids off the street and getting them away from drugs. And through this journey of us having this webpage, I met one of his former kids.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book, and he had my uncle as the chapter 1 about how he saved his life. And now he runs a boxing gym in Staten Island. So he did touch people's lives in that. And that's...
Yeah, it's true. My father didn't want to discover a new fighter and make him a champ. He didn't want to be a side man or a cut man or whatever. He wanted to keep kids off the street. He had this I don't know what word to use, but he had this image of Father Flanagan, Boys Town.
Well, you know what? And a fighter commands respect at every level. It's a little easier, You're a pro fighter walks in the room, people are going to listen a little bit.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about boxing or you're giving advice or anything else. And look, every fighter's got a story of up and down. You're not a fighter if you don't go through ups and downs. I don't care who you are. You've been around. We've all been around. You know, everybody has a high and a low in this sport, and that's what I think makes this sport great. It's like how you react after the high, or how do you react after the low? Do you get back up? And yeah, I think some people, Neil, are people like your dad who want to be mentors that use the sport of boxing as a tool to say, look, you want to box? Fine, this is what you might have to do it. But you know what? There's other avenues out there through boxing that could help you. Yeah. You know? But so you guys started this journey. And what do you see as the reaction from people when you talk about your dad, your uncle, your friend? You know, because, again, like, you know, I told you guys outside, you know, I asked the kid today if a fighter didn't know who the fighter is. You know what I mean? And this is like, you know, we don't have a lot of tape or video from those days. Right. Whereas now, like, past sports, you know, we can go on the internet. No, we can look up the 1970 Yankees or whatever it is, right? We're losing that footage and that part of history. And see, the thing is, boxing is history at that time. Your dad, your friend, your uncle fought during World War II, doesn't get a title shot because we're at war. Yeah. We're at war. Like, nobody understands that stuff like we do. We're a little older, right? Mm-hmm. So we understand what countries were going through at that time. And I think, you know, to keep that alive, so your journey is like...
It's been a lot of fun, our journey. You know, it started with Jose writing an article about the gatekeeper, you know, trying to get my uncle into the Boxing Hall of Fame. Then I went to a dinner with my godfather, who's my cousin, and we were like, I basically said to him, well, I'm looking at some of the names in the New York State Boxing Hall of Fame. He beat most of these guys, so he belongs in here. So that was our mission, to get him into the Hall of Fame. And that was 2023, we got him into the Boxing Hall of Fame. 50 of our family members came that day. We jam-packed the place.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Then after that, we have Bobby Cassidy Jr., who's a writer for Newsday. He did a documentary on my uncle, which we're all in. Yeah. And it's in the Greenwich Village Film Festival starting
November 12th.
You know.
They're going to have the first viewing.
Yeah, we entered it in a couple other film festivals, and it was longer. Yeah. And it didn't make it to the final cut. And then the Greenwich Village, luckily, was a 20-minute demand. They cut it down to 20 minutes, and they accepted it. So.
Well, it makes sense for the neighborhood, right?
Well,
that's coming from there.
So, you know,
we see on our T-shirts.
We felt we were a slam dunk, but you never know, because you don't know the people who are in charge of judging it, you know?
But you know what's funny, Dave? Somebody asked me the other day, I was speaking to somebody about this whole thing with Tough Tony. We have the shirts, we have the webpage. Yeah. And people are like, what's the end game? And right now, the end game for me is right now just enjoying it. Exactly. We're enjoying it. Like, Brown's boxing cards are coming back for a new... They haven't had it since 1992.
95 or something. Right
this was actually Topps. And Brown's is coming back, and they're having all new fighters, but every year they're going to start with one old-time fighter to try to bring, like we're talking about, recognize old-timers. And my uncle's the initial old-time fighter, which it's a great honor, you know?
No, I think, you know, like this is... Like I keep saying, a part of history that's going, you know, if we don't keep it alive in the gym, the history of boxing, where it started, the people, you know, like your uncle, like your friend, you know, people are going to forget.
Correct.
And you know what? Again, New York, guys coming out of New York, there's always different stories out of the village, you know. You hear of Graziano from Brooklyn. You hear of, you know, different stories of different
fights. They were great friends, too, Graziano, my uncle.
LaMotta from the Bronx, you know. Sugar Ray Robinson from Harlem, you know, on and on and on. I'm missing a Queens fighter somewhere.
Billy Graham.
Yeah.
Well, you know what's another interesting one? We ran into Sandy Sadler's daughter.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you look at his record, it's ridiculous. How many fights did he have?
But there's one missing on his record.
Tony Pellone.
Sandy Sadler and Tony Pellone fought.
Yeah.
But he's not showing up on either one's record.
He fought on a different name. But Sandy Sadler, I think, won 117 fights.
30 fights or something, yeah.
No, he won 100. No one's ever going to break that record.
He's got over 100 knockouts.
First of all, if you're going to tell a fighter to fight that many fights, he can look at you and say you're crazy.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not signing up for this. So you guys mentioned Endgame, right? And you obviously, you've been documenting this stuff. No thoughts of a movie?
We're hoping for bites. You know, I mean,
There's
just to
been some
keep the
interest,
thing
actually.
going. You know, just to keep, some to answer to some invitation, like an invitation to
Yeah.
your podcast, and maybe we got the video going, and maybe we'll do enlarge that video and go in different film festivals. But yeah, I mean, I'd like to write a book if I could just, motivate myself. Or
Listen, you have all the makings of putting it together.
We're not
From the-
filmmakers, though. We don't know.
Yeah,
you
but
know,
I'm talking about the story of
Oh, the
putting
story's there,
The
yeah.
story is there, and the time is there because the back end of it.
You know what, Dave? We have to find a film writer. I think because you're right. The story itself is a beginning to end great story,
Yeah,
and we just got to get the right person to put it down and document it.
yeah, and see how it would go. Is there any video on your dad fighting anywhere?
oh yeah,
very little, yeah.
Very little.
not a whole lot, but there is.
There's a
yeah.
Charlie Faseri's
Charlie
second
Faseri.
fight.
Billy Graham,
Yeah.
one of the Billy Graham fights.
And one of the Billy Graham fights.
Yeah.
Is it on the internet or is it?
Yeah.
Yes.
it
Yeah,
is?
you can
All right, I
find
gotta
it.
find that.
Bobby Cassidy's channel has it. Throwback Media.
Yeah,
We got also in the video that's entered into the contest. We got Rocky Graziano and Buddy Hackett are being interviewed by Johnny Carson in
Oh.
the '80s,
yeah,
and Graziano says, "Oh, I know Buddy Hackett forever. We used to hang out in Greenwood Lake with other fighters." And Buddy Hackett goes, "And Tony Pellone?" And he goes, "Oh, and Tony Pellone."
Yeah.
So we integrated videos like that. you know.
that's great. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's a
And you know what's great? Looking at this picture, right? This is still up on the wall at Manetta Tavern, in
Really?
the village. The guy hasn't fought in 80 years, and his picture's still up. There's another picture in the
I don't know what it's called.
the
Italian
the
civil
Italian-
rights or
with
something.
Joe Colombo's old,
yeah.
and his picture's still in
On the window. Yeah.
in the window.
The cruise ship.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's an
my daughter was
interesting
on
one,
a
yeah.
cruise, and she's Sorrento Pizza.
Sorrento Pizza.
has my uncle's picture in the window. They were like, "Oh, that's our name."
Yeah. So, one thing we need to touch base on right here, in those days, we talked about authenticity and, the lure of the Italian fighters till to this day. I mean, we look back and there was always, Marciano, Graziano, LaMotta, your dad, Tony Gennaro, go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Is it where we are on the East Coast, or is it
I don't know. What is it?
pride?
Yeah.
What is? I mean, I know it's pride, but what do you think that society puts out more on when we see an Italian fighter?
Well, it's part romanticism, it's part poverty,
Yeah.
and it's funny you should say that because we have this. My father met Joe DiMaggio once,
Right.
long after Joe DiMaggio retired, and my father says, "Joe, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm one of your big fans, obviously, Manhattan Yankees, whatever."
Yeah,
And Joe DiMaggio says, "Come on," and DiMaggio recited my father's record to him.
Yeah, DiMaggio told him he was a fan of his.
wow.
Yeah, he says, "You're the guy who, you had 10 brothers and 10 sisters, and you supported the family." Or, he gave him a description of his life instead of the other way
And went to a
around.
lot of his fights, DiMaggio.
Yeah.
That's impressive. But see, that's also like,
But that goes back to, because they always say DiMaggio himself felt a real determination to make the Italian Americans look good. He always dressed right. He behaved in public. He felt it was his obligation as an Italian American star to make Italian. And then you just mentioned the Italian fighters. So he might have felt a kinship to my father from that standpoint.
yeah. And then look, like you said, in those days, families struggled. I mean, it's not saying that they don't today, but I think there's more. Your dad was not only fighting for himself, but he's fighting for his family.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't like, he came home with the money and the money was spread throughout
Exactly.
the family. At
And,
that
and,
point.
and sometimes my grandfather gets a bad rap because there's been mentions in books and stuff about my grandfather taking all the money and whatever, but my grandfather invested the money. My grandfather bought restaurants and provided jobs for the family, And but that I missed my point. But yeah, you know, you did. The point I want to make is they were hard workers also.
Yeah.
You know, and and like my father was the third oldest in the working person in the family. There was my grandfather, his older brother, who was very hard working, and then my father, who took a beating for money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then the three of them supported the whole family, but my father provided a real big bankroll every now and
But
then.
there was funny stories about it. Like,
You know.
he would come back with a $3,000, $3,500, you know, sometimes $10,000, $12,000 purse.
Yeah.
And my grandfather would give him $15. Yeah, go have a night on the town, kid.
Yeah, but that's the old time way,
No,
right?
correct.
Because
There's
today,
more
if
family.
you get a fighter makes 15 grand, he's broke the next week. He's looking for somebody to help him out because he went out and bought a watch. He took his girl out. He bought a car, whatever the hell, you know. That was old school right there. And you know what? And you grew up in that way where you didn't worry about it. The family was a little more close-knit.
Yeah.
You
Because you know what? When he was shining shoes, he was bringing the money home to the father also, not just the boxing, you know?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I
No,
interrupted
you're
you.
good. You're good. You're good. The dynamic of what was your dad's relationship with Tommy Ryan besides boxing? And I don't mean it like that. I mean, was there a love-hate? Was there a...
Did my father resist getting involved in any shenanigans?
No.
Dave, Tommy Ryan was the best man at his wedding.
That's what I'm talking. I'm talking about their relationship as a manager and a fighter.
And he baptized me.
And,
Okay.
and it was his godfather.
Right.
Yeah.
And recently, in one of the books that Bobby Cassidy has written, in our documentary, Xavier, who's Tommy Ryan's son,
Right.
spoke about it. Like, they were like, you know, almost like a father-son or older brother, younger brother relationship. It wasn't just a manager and a fighter.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for, the dynamic.
And he did use the line "best friends" at some point too.
Yeah.
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 Tommy Ryan was a great manager, and he may have, if he kept up in the game, he might have been known as one of the better managers. But then he had that incident with the Ernie Durando Rocky Castellani fight, and who wants to expand on it? You want to expand on it?
Yeah.
First of all, the Genovese were legit boxing guys, right? Gabe Genovese was a top-notch promoter. They had Baby Sabin. They had a bunch of fighters, Jose Basora, and they knew the game. They knew the game very well. Tommy Ryan was a very good cornerman. He had Ray Arcel as an assistant for a lot of his.
Ray
right?
Arcel, great, you know.
Teddy Bentham, who later trained Jerry Quarry and Carlos Ortiz.
Davy Jones.
Davy Jones. And then you have Pellone was one of I believe Pellone was his first marquee fighter, right?
Yeah.
Tommy Ryan. So where was I going with this? Some of that's
You were going,
contagious now. I
back to
forget.
the Marcel fight.
And how Tommy got in trouble.
Tommy was Rocky Castellani was fighting Ernie Durando. It was a very big fight, right? And he got fishy. He got very suspicious when they appointed, I think it was Ray Miller, right? They appointed one of them as the ref. It was Ray Miller. He didn't like something about something, right? And then the gambling started going up the other way. So he was already entering that fight thinking, I'm up against it, right?
Yeah.
And when you see the fight, Rocky Castellani went down. It was a legitimate lockdown. Then when he got up, I'm going to side with Xavier. Ebony, it does look like the ref is pushing him. So when you're pushing a guy back, it looks like he's falling. So the ref called it over. And Tommy Ryan blew his top and attacked the referee.
He went in the ring and punched the referee.
And then he attacked Al Wheel in the background afterwards, right? So he lost his license, and he had to get away from the game. Otherwise, we might have been, if he'd have been still managing in the 60s, he might have had a couple of champions and everything. We'd be thinking about him pretty differently.
And Jose says he found documentation that my father was listed as a manager.
No, your father told me that.
Oh, I thought you found something.
No, he told me once when Tommy Ryan lost his license, your father, Pellone, was the manager of record for Rocky Castellani and some of those guys. Yeah.
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 Because Ryan lost his license, so he filled in as the manager.
You had to put somebody on it. Unique dynamic there. Now, as far as like that, he was obviously taken care of by Tommy Ryan on a weekly basis, whereas a lot of people don't understand that dynamic with fighters today.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't the bad manager kind of relationship.
It wasn't
no.
that.
Yeah.
And I don't think Ryan was a bad manager
No,
to
he's
any of his fighters.
Very fair.
Yeah, he's he's a former fighter himself, so I think he wanted to help
Yeah.
these guys out.
Well, obviously, the fighters that he had were fighters,
Yeah, exactly.
and it makes it a little easier to manage when you got fighters.
you got that right,
When
yeah.
you got guys that want to fight and that you can put in
Yeah.
a situation to be successful, and you don't have to, go get 10 fights or 15 fights to build a fighter like
Correct.
they do today,
Yeah,
and walk it through.
And according to his son, he did some acts of kindness that were if one of his ex-fighters or somebody got hurt or something, he paid a hospital bill.
Yeah.
And they may have gone as far as to send them a gift saying the greatest guy who ever lived. Acts of kindness like any other
Yeah.
guy with a lot of bucks to spare.
Yeah, but you know what? It's the dynamic also of no matter who you are as a manager or as a trainer, you got to have a connection with your fighter.
Well, you know what? Like, Dave, the picture here is Tommy over the house.
Yeah.
My uncle's house with the 10 brothers and 2 sisters having Sunday dinner. And I think Aunt Susie was saying that it was a regular occurrence.
Yeah.
He would be at the house having Sunday dinners with them. So it was a lot more than just a manager-fighter,
So you think with that relationship, it helped your father to perform as a fighter, knowing that, he had somebody in his corner.
I believe he thought he had somebody
that was looking out for him.
Yeah, I believe he thought he had somebody looking out for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and someone who knew how to,
To position him to the fights, to move
Maneuver.
him.
Yeah.
Keep the wolves away.
Yeah, which in those days had to be tougher.
Well, Tommy was part wolf himself, so
Yeah, I mean, look, you got to,
exactly.
they're not going to pull the wool over his.
They might have though. They might have once or twice though. Business talks exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So after fighting, what did your dad gravitate towards?
Well, he owned a bar. Then it's funny. He had this years ago. The racks they put at the end of a bar to hang the potato chips from.
Yeah.
Well, in the old days, if they used to have packages of sardines or sardines, anchovies.
Yeah.
Little piece of cheese and crackers in a like a Ziploc kind of bag, but although they didn't have Ziploc in those days. And it would be at the end of the bar because if a bar didn't have a kitchen, the law said you had to have food.
Yeah.
So they would have that to provide food. And it was my father had he had 5,000 customers. 5,000 customers throughout 5 boroughs, and yeah, he said, Tony, how you doing? Have a drink, whatever. So it was a fun experience.
Greatest job in the world.
He may have had 5,000 customers, but I don't think he could fulfill them because he only did it himself with a station wagon. He never expanded or got bigger, but they called it Snappy Snacks.
Yeah.
Who was the... He also, because at one point he owned a restaurant pizzeria and he had a singing waiter. What was his
Bobby
name?
Milano.
Oh.
Bobby Milano.
Well, that's when he worked for my grandfather in Coney Island.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was he had a best friend from the village who had a nephew in Buffalo who had a good voice, and his name was Bobby Milano. And my father brought him to Brooklyn to live with us, and he got him a job in Coney Island making pizza and stuff while he was managing it. And the kid would sing behind the counter and stuff. And at that time, you had legitimate nightclubs in Coney Island with real musicians that would, and they overheard the kid singing, and my father became his manager. And anyway, he wound up going to Las Vegas, where he was a lounge singer for like 40 years.
He had some big hits too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he wound up marrying Keely Smith late in her life. He was her last husband, but his name was Bobby Milano. And when I was 4 years old, I shared a bed with him because he had to sleep somewhere while he was working in Coney Island.
You're giving him your room.
Yeah.
Do you think after your dad retired, you know, I don't like to use the word regret or anything. Do you think he missed the game, or he was done when he was done?
No, he always made it seem like he didn't miss the game.
Yeah.
You know,
Because, you know, you talk about this, you see fighters today, everybody's making a comeback, right? Everybody thinks, you know, we see Tyson, we see Roy Jones. You know, George Foreman had a great run. He actually, you know, but fighters don't want to put it down sometimes. And I think that has to do today, maybe not then, because of the money being made that these guys can see. But I think as a fighter, that thought that you could always go back in the ring, or that want to go back in the ring, kind of rides with you.
no, I think as I was mentioning it I mentioned it to him also in the car coming over. But my father's idea of being smart or intellectual or smart, it was either being a stand-up comic or a songwriter, and he really, you know, like he really admired that. And if anything he would have wanted to do, I mean, boxing was behind him, you know.
Yeah.
When he
was done.
He was done, and when he used to when he joined AA for a brief time, he would speak all over the 5 boroughs, or even Jersey and Long Island. He would be a guest speaker. And he would go up and do a 45-minute comedy act. I mean, you know, that's what he admired. He thought that people that were really smart were either stand-up comics or songwriters. And you know, I mean, you know, you see even like in the Raging Bull.
Yeah,
they
Jake
got
Lamont.
him. You know, he wanted to be a stand-up comic. Until, I mean, we even spent time with through Ring 8. I became friends with Coney for a little while, Jerry Coney.
Yeah.
And so I met, and he just wanted. Raging Bull just wanted to do comedy. You know, he just wanted to get up there and tell the same jokes over and over again.
You know, back to the question of the other thing. There was about a year before he really finished. I think he was seriously hurt. He had the nasal problem, and he had surgery. And if you look at his record, he came back. He wasn't fighting 15-round fights anymore. He was fighting 8-round fights. He was almost like done at that point, being injured, and try to make a comeback. And his last fight ever was
Vince Martinez.
Vince Martinez knocked him out. And that's when he said, I couldn't feel my legs in the fight. You know, I think that's when he knew, like I said, I think he was done a year prior, but then he tried to say, let me see if I can still do this. And what's sad about it is he was 23.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the whole thing that, like, I'm having a little trouble in today's side, like, assimilating that to today's fighter. You got guys coming in at 23, they're hitting their stride right now.
Yeah.
Right? They're starting to really, and with conditioning and everything else, and I know a lot of factors, but, you know, you're fighting every 2 weeks. By the time you get out of the fight,
there's no time to heal.
Okay, you're a day or two, maybe you're not doing nothing. Maybe a day. I'm just speculating. I don't know, right? Then you got to go back to the gym to kind of shake out, to get, right? Now you got to figure out, I came out of a tough fight. Now I got to go back into another tough fight. There's no time.
Think about, like we talked about earlier. Tony Gennaro gets hurt. 4 days.
Yeah.
Can you fight in 4 days? Sure. And you're fighting Kid Gavilan. Sure, I'll be there. And he fought 2 weeks prior to that.
But, you know, you got to look at one thing too, Neil. I think when you get that kind of experience where you're in there and you're continuously, like, you're not fighting once every 2 years. So for you to fight on 4 days' notice, is it crazy? Yeah. Okay? For some people, it's crazy, right? But you're in the gym, and if that opportunity comes along,
sure,
you got to take it, right? So now, say he beats Kid Gavilan.
Then he's fighting Sugar Ray.
Right? Now he's getting, you know what I'm saying? It's like, and then here's the other thing, right? Probably that's another payday.
Absolutely.
Right? Because whatever arrangement you have with your manager as a fighter, and there's so many different ones, you don't know, right? The bottom line is that purse is not always going to be there. You know, you don't take that fight. Okay, I'm gonna call Jose. Jose will take that fight.
Take it. Correct.
You know what I mean? And you know, say Jose beats him, and you said, "Oh man, I should have took that fight."
Well, you know what? We talk about his 78 fights. He mentioned it. I take his word on it.
110.
He had 110 fights because he fought under different names when he was even
No
younger.
amateur background, though, right?
one
We
amateur
didn't even
fight.
talk about that.
Yeah,
No
he had one amateur
background.
fight, and then he
Fight.
fought as Jimmy
Yeah.
Pell, and who else did he fight?
I don't even think he remembered. Whatever they introduced him as, he was okay with. Because he didn't want the family to know he was fighting originally.
Correct. So he did under Jimmy Pell, but great story with, tell the story, Jose, that you have in your book.
Which one?
About the Fleischman's book, and
Yeah,
he tells
with the
he
record?
tells Jose, I
Yeah.
had 110 fights. Jose says, Jose's younger, and he goes, no, I think you had
Yeah,
78.
I'm verifying it with the record book.
The record book says you have 78. So he goes, where'd you get that from? What was the name of the book?
Nat Fleischer's Ring Record Book.
Ring Record. Where'd you get it from? Ring Record book? He goes, yeah. Well, go home, get that book, and shove it up your ass.
Yeah.
But he set it up nicely. He said, go home, get that book, turn to the page, and then shove it up. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
my
but,
uncle was
in those days, you had fights going on that weren't sanctioned.
Correct.
Or didn't,
Yeah.
or you know what, or for whatever reason
Yeah.
didn't get sanctioned,
Got it.
or go and into a record book. And now we have box rec and
Like we said, he swore he fought Sandy Sadler, and I think Sandy Sadler's family said they fought.
Yeah.
But it's not in a record book anywhere.
could have been like on a pro-am.
Something like that, yeah. Something like that. We call them smokers
You
or whatever.
smokers
Yeah,
or whatever
yeah.
you ever want to put
Yep.
down to. But getting back to the fact of being done at 23 years old is just like. Let me ask you this: if
Excuse me.
he goes another 2 years, say fights to 25, he has over 100 fights
Yeah,
Yeah,
easily.
oh yeah, on the record.
on the
Yeah,
record.
Easily.
Yeah.
Dave, I mentioned in the documentary you did, I think if he started at 18 as opposed to starting at 15,
Yeah.
he's easily a champion of the world. You know what I'm saying? Like, 15, you're not really fully developed yet. And you're in the ring with men that have
You're in
fought.
with men.
Men that have remember,
You're
he
in with
wasn't the
men.
only one fighting like that. So you're
No,
in the
he
ring
wasn't,
With,
but
you're in
you're
the ring
right.
with somebody that's already had 50 fights under his belt. You know,
But you're right, Neil. You're not fully developed. And, you can be the biggest 15-year-old kid in the world, and you're fighting a guy who's 25 or 26.
Right.
It's a different.
You're still
Correct.
15.
It's still
Exactly.
a difference the way they hit. And I totally agree with you on that. But take the war situation out.
Well, back then, no one's goal was to be. Well, I shouldn't say that. The goal was to be a headline fighter, and if you headline Madison Square Garden, I remember in the '80s being introduced to old fighters. They wouldn't even say the name. They would say he fought at the Garden. He fought at the Garden. That was like making the major leagues.
correct.
Right?
Listen, I as a trainer, right, I've got 2 wins in the Garden, 2 wins
Okay.
at Gleason's. So for what you're saying,
Yeah.
like if you talk about boxing people, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was.
That's and I want because who the hell cares if you won a friggin' Oklahoma?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know,
and
who-
Robinson only defended his title like 5 times in like 7 years. So that was the lottery, right? Winning a title shot. The goal was to become a main event fighter, and your pops did it 55 times, 55 main events in the New York City area.
Yeah, kind
That's
of.
crazy. You think about it, 55 main
He was
events.
probably the biggest headliner in New
For
York
a little
at that
while,
time.
he was,
Yeah.
if not the biggest, one of. Yeah.
So back to you guys. Why do you think? And you got a lot of stuff going on, documentaries, people involved here now. Why do you think his name kind of wasn't out there till you guys really got a little movement here?
I think because he didn't socialize. He didn't.
Right.
He when I was about 4 years old, he got a spot on a Bob Hope special, TV special. He had to go every night for 5 nights to rehearse. He got 500 for the whole week, and all he had to do was run across the stage with a gun. Okay, it was a comedy bit.
Yeah.
Okay. My father's opinion of doing that thing is you did too much waiting around. Now, I've known professional actors who feel the same way. They actually got out of the business because they said there's too much waiting around. But my father was an early proponent of that comment. Yeah. Okay, so, but the thing is, he withdrew from the limelight. That's the reason. That's the answer to your question, if I understand it. And, you could have, I mean, he could have had his name more out there. He could have socialized more. He could even Ring 8. People he knew how to drag him to Ring 8. The couple of times he probably went in the late 80s and the early 90s. And it was like, oh yeah, a couple of guys, they drove me there. But he didn't initiate it himself. You know what I mean?
I also mentioned
That's the reason.
Rocky
yeah.
Graziano was a lot more popular. Like, what was that, the 80s, 90s? You always heard his name, Rocky Graziano.
Yeah.
My uncle's personality outshined him and the way his storytelling ability. But like you said, he chose not to be in the spotlight.
Yeah, and Graziano became on television commercials and stuff like that. Was obviously the movie about his life.
Yeah.
With Tony Curtis and
Paul Newman, I think, right? Paul Newman.
Paul
was it?
Newman,
Right. Yeah.
right? Yes, Paul Newman. You're right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Somebody up there
Somebody
likes
up
me.
there
Somebody
likes
up
me.
there
likes
Paul
me,
Newman,
yeah.
yes. Right.
I got a great story of that. Okay.
Let's hear it.
All right.
Are you holding it back, or are you waiting for us to ask for it?
No, I don't want to.
Hurry up before you forget.
I don't want to be the only guy talking. That's why.
That's
okay.
all right.
So Rocky.
That's what we brought you in here for.
So it's like the 1950s. Okay. Rocky Graziano and his manager, Rocky Graziano and the guy who's writing a book about Graziano and his wife go to Nathan's to have a hot dog. Okay. They go walking back to their car. They say, "Hey, let's go see if Tony Pellone's in the Tony Pellone bar." Okay.
Yeah.
So they go into the bar. And my grandmother, my father's mother, had this saying in Italian, which was, "Somebody up there likes him."
Yeah.
Okay. Graziano walks into the bar unexpectedly. My father's behind the bar. And my father goes, "Hey, there he is. Somebody up there likes him." Or loves him, whatever, And so my father was always under the assumption that being with the writer, who was a perceptive individual,
Put that
decided
in his
to
memory.
make that the title of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing, right? We go back to the era of boxing in New York at the time. And I think, look, this boxing is different than other sports because, you can go to a boxing gym. Fighters are more approachable, even ex-fighters, than any
Absolutely,
other athlete.
yeah.
You know what I mean? It's the camaraderie, like, and I see it in gyms. Like, I've been around, different fighters, and some better than worse. But most of them are all play. Even like anybody in the game, like I see it, they're always looking to help out people. Majority of them, and very approachable to their fans and stuff like that. And it's a different dynamic.
That's the hard part for me in this field of getting more involved in the boxing community. I don't think there's enough being done for the guys that were, fought their 30, 40, 50 fights, and
No.
they're shot upstairs.
We
and-
talked about this, Neil, a little
Yeah.
bit, and I'm going to get into this, and we'll kind of wrap it up a little bit because you're making a good point. So, John Scully, I know everybody knows John, great trainer, great advocate of the sport, and he does a lot for the older fighters. So, I've been talking to John, and obviously the gentleman judge with Brown's card, and the idea of how do we get to this point where fighters can have something when they leave this game?
How do we get a medical when they retire? You know what I'm saying?
I have my own ideas. I don't know how, because when you start putting people together with money and everything else, there's a lot of shadiness that happens. Yeah. But could you have, fighters, some sort of retirement fund for fighters? I know people are raising money for fighters, but it's not enough all the time. These guys, some of these ex-fighters don't have a pot to piss in a window to throw it out of, and then medical. Like, okay, we all know the stories. Some fighters, Ali, okay, unfortunately had Parkinson's disease, but his fame carried him through life afterwards, whereas maybe a fighter without his name wouldn't have had the medical, wouldn't have had the care that he got because he was Muhammad Ali at that time, and then becomes, an advocate for the Olympics, everything else. But, yeah, you're making a good point there. How do we get to a point of an organization that says, okay, retired fighter, you're going to have some sort of benefits? If you as a fighter, I think fighters should be educated. Your purse, okay? Hey, it's your money, right? You got to pay your people. I understand. But you know what? here's an option for you. Like a 401k, 5% of your purse, 10% of your purse. Have a fund that is being run by legitimate people, a hedge fund or somebody out there or whoever it is that's going to say, okay, put it down, whatever it is, and you walk away with some money. You walk away with a medical plan that can take care of you. Because you know what? Like college sports, the fans, the people out there, not the fans, TV, management, and promotion are benefiting off your performance.
Sure.
All the pay-per-view money, all the money that is being made on these high level in Saudi Arabia, okay? And this is just my opinion. I'm not yakking on anybody or saying anything negative. I just think that there needs to be something to take care of these fighters because a lot of them walk out broke.
Yeah, well,
I
I
agree.
couldn't agree more. But it's only going to happen when what you said earlier about like a one sanctioning body or elimination championship or something where it's just always been all over the place.
I don't think we'll ever see that, Neil, because there's too much money involved.
Yeah.
And you know this, and you guys are learning it, right? Money in the sport moves the fighter. Money moves the game. Like I said, if you hit lottery today, say, you know what? I want to be in boxing. Well, what do you want to do? I want to start a promotional company. Or you know what? I want to start an organization. All right, if it makes sense, nobody's going to really stop you. Mm-hmm. We've seen it with celebrities. We've seen different people try to get in the sport who don't, now it's big dollars out there. There's big dollars out there right now. So I'm going to kind of wrap it up here a little bit, and I really appreciate you guys coming out here. I'd love to be able to sit down again with you guys and talk, but we're going to kind of go around the table. I'm going to throw a little quick thing at you guys. And I know probably it's going to be, but I'm going to ask each one of you, other than your dad and your uncle and your friend, best fighter you saw or liked growing up. Favorite fighter. Let's put it that way. Favorite fighter. From any era. Can't say your dad. And no disrespect to him, but...
I got to think about it a little longer.
All right, we're going to come back to you.
Yeah, come back to
Jose's got like 3. I could see him biting at the bit.
No,
He's
you know
coming
what
across
it
at
is?
me.
I go back. I got the attitude of the Bronx Tale.
Yeah.
When little C was upset when the Yankees lost, and then what was the big guy's name in the movie?
Saz Palminteri.
Yeah. His character tells him, "What are you worried about for you? That guy's getting paid. You think he's worried about you?" And your father had that too. He would say, "They're all regular people. Don't put no one on a pedestal, right?" So I always thought Sugar Ray Leonard was the best fighter I ever seen. But as far as favorites, I can't have a favorite unless I know you, right? So my favorite fighter was Juan Laporte. Juan Laporte, the featherweight.
Yeah, Juan Laporte.
Because my brother fought him in the Spanish gloves. And my brother lost. And everyone on the block was teasing my brother for a while until Juan Laporte came to the block and told everyone, no, he almost beat me. And I want him to be my sparring partner.
Yeah.
I was like 7 years old. Ever since that, he became my favorite fighter, Juan Laporte, the featherweight.
Yeah.
So I can't make a favorite out of someone I see on TV. I don't know you. I don't.
No,
right,
and I think
right.
that's a good look because when I give you mine, I'll give you why mine is the same way also.
I had a few, like Mike Tyson. Whenever Mike fought, you had to watch Mike. Mike was, something special to watch all the time. Being Italian, I loved Boom Boom Mancini as well.
Yeah.
And I was also a big Roberto Duran fan.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny because your father, back in the 80s, he didn't watch boxing unless it was Tyson, Boom Boom, or Roberto Duran.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Well, they were the 3 mainstays back then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, mine is, I'm going to tell you mine. Mine is Ray Mancini.
Okay.
And I had the opportunity, funny story, right? I had a friend of mine, they were from Brooklyn who were friends with, because Ray used to come to New York all the time and train.
So did his father.
Yeah.
You know who his
Lenny.
father trained with? in New York?
I don't know who his dad trained with.
His father.
Tony?
Yeah.
So my buddy calls me up one day. He goes, listen, Ray's coming into town. It's his 21st birthday. They're having it at Studio 54. I want you to come. Okay? No problem, right? I'm excited. You know, everybody's watching Mancini. I've never been around anybody.
Gotcha.
But watching him fight and his style was
Yeah.
just... And you've seen he might not have been the most talented fighter at that time, you know, athletic-wise. So I'm playing baseball in college at the time. And I go to turn a double play in a game, and I break my leg that day. My father and I are fighting, right? I'm in the hospital. I'm like, listen, I'm going. I end up going, right? Long story short, I couldn't move around. We go, right? And I talked to Ray about this a couple of times when I've met him at events, at shows and stuff like this. I sat next to his father, Lenny, the whole night on the couch because I couldn't move, right? And the girl I was with, I said, just go, and we just talked boxing the whole night. And I remember exactly, he was wearing a burgundy leisure suit with his black spectacles, those thick,
right.
And just, aren't you? No. And, you know, Ray came and it was like, yeah, how you doing? Nice to meet you. But I'm talking to his dad. You
Right,
know?
right.
Like, but yeah, that's, I need a connection to a fighter too.
Yep.
I'm not one that just like, I got to know a little bit about you and your
Of course,
struggle.
yeah.
But tell us a little bit about, one, Jose, give us your books and everything and where we can find you.
Well, I got the biography on Panama Brown that's
Okay.
called Black Gate. You can find it anywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I did New York City's Greatest Boxers. It's just a small book, but did the best I could. I had to follow their format, so it's limited pages. Mm-hmm. I should do a part 2 to that because there's a lot of fighters I should add. Next coming up, hopefully December 1st, 4-belt era, but spelled ERROR.
Okay.
And I'm going back into history. People love the belts. I can't tell someone what to love or what not to love. But what I don't like is when people look back in history and say, oh, he wasn't a champ. He must not have been that good because they're using today's standards. So I went back to the beginning of time and I gave everyone 4 or 5 belts, interims, regulars, supers. And now the playing ground is leveled now. Now you'll see who stands up and who stands out. You take his father, for example, compare him with Arturo Gatti, right? 2 exciting, popular fighters of their day. Who was Gotti's biggest win? Did Gotti ever beat a Hall of Famer? Tony Pellone's got 3 wins over Hall of Famers. Now, if you look at my book, he's got 6 titles, right? So now it changes the way we look at everyone. So that's my next book coming out, hopefully December 1st.
Awesome. Tell us where we can find you on social media.
I don't use it too much. I got Twitter, @CorpusWriter.
Okay.
And I got a teeny little baby Instagram page too, Safe Day, or @CorpusWriter.
All right, great. Neil Sr. and Neil, you know, we appreciate you guys. Tell us a little bit more about where we can find information on Tony Pellone and what's in the future for you guys here going forward.
Yeah, we have the Tough Tony Pellone page on Instagram. That's our main page, and we post daily on it. We try to mix up. We got one with the T-shirt one day, and then we go with the historical story and go back and forth. And like I mentioned, we're going to be in the Greenwich Village Film Festival on November 12th.
Okay,
And
we will be looking for that.
The Life and Times of Tough Tony Pellone.
Yep, The
Okay.
Life and Times of Tough Tony Pellone. And we're going to be entered in some other festivals and actually start looking around to maybe flesh out a larger story as well.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, listen, I really, really appreciate you guys coming up here. It's a real good slice of boxing history. I'd love to have you guys up again because I'm sure we're missing a lot of stuff here. And when I go back and start thinking on it, I'm sure I'll be hitting you up with some questions and stuff like that because I think this is something that needs to be out there as far as the sport for history. And there are so many guys like your dad out there that the story needs to be told of what they've done. And they're humble, hardworking men, and that's why it's kind of where it is, you know, and got to respect that and being in the sport. So,
well, we need to say thank you to you to give us the platform to speak on it.
This is, listen, I appreciate this. I really do because, you know, we all care about boxing and the people in it. And to me, this is my passion, and I can see it with you guys. So we're going to kind of sign out here. I appreciate everybody coming up again. To my guy Dan from Get Elevated, I appreciate you for all the gear. And this is Coach Dave McDonough. Train hard, train smart, and we'll see you in the next round.
I'm Coach Dave. Welcome back to Coach's Corner.
Come on.